Alrighty, well, we'll get going here. So we are doing our office hour this month is specific focus on winter sowing, and Veronica will talk a little bit more about that. But just kind of a quick overview of what these Indiana Grown for Schools office hours are. So typically we'll have kind of an info sharing session. So like I said, this month we're doing it all about winter sowing. And then we just kind of open it up for questions and answers about really anything farm to school. Of course, we have Veronica that I'll introduce in a minute here to answer any questions about winter sowing, but we're happy to answer kind of any other questions as well. If you have run into any problems or anything with your farm to school efforts or winter sowing efforts, we can kind of talk through there, and then just kind of a space to share ideas or challenges that you're going through. So we just like to have these office hours kind of standing on Wednesdays every third Wednesday of the month for people to join and kind of engage in whatever way they need. So this month we are very excited to be joined by Veronica Bullock. Veronica has served as the Purdue Extension Agriculture and Natural Resource Educator in Franklin County since August of 2021. She earned her BS from Purdue in Natural Resources and Environmental Science in 2017 and is currently pursuing her master's in the Purdue Forestry and Natural Resource Department. Drawing on her diverse natural resource experience, Veronica develops programming that is both practical and community centered. Her work spans a wide range of topics, including community gardens, pollinator conservation, circular economy, homesteading, drones, wildlife, forest and farm management, succession planning, and county government. She is passionate about helping residents connect with land, build sustainable practices, and strengthen their local communities. So we are so excited when I read her slide there of all her different experience. Yeah, we're just grateful for her time and excited to learn all that she has to share. With that, I'm going to turn it over to her. I'm going to kind of switch screens here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here with you all. Okay, does that
Great.
look good to you?
That looks great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for the introduction, Sophie. I really appreciate it. And so I'm very excited to be here and share from some of my experiences with winter sowing, some of the things I've learned along the way, and kind of how I got started with it. So just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, just starting of why we should start seeds and why that can help us in our gardening efforts, what winter seed sowing is, and then how you can make your own winter sowing mini greenhouse. The picture on the screen here is my first introduction to winter sowing. My advisor, Henry Cascada, had sent this picture to me after a trip we went on to Costa Rica and had mentioned this as a way to start seeds. And prior to that, in 22, I had never even heard of winter sowing. And the last couple of years, I've been experimenting with it. We have a couple of community gardens in Franklin County, one in Brookville, the Lou Wallace Garden, and one in Laurel. It's our Laurel Community Garden, and we've used winter sowing at both of those. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we chose to do that. But first off, I want to talk about why we should start seeds. So some of the advantages to starting seeds is it helps us get some vigorous plants that we can get into the garden sooner that are going to produce those flowers and produce sooner for us. And another reason to kind of start seeds is that some of our plants are really kind of directly hard to sow into the garden. So for example, if we're planting tomatoes or cauliflower or eggplants straight into the garden, a lot of times those plants will get overpowered by the weeds. So if we start them earlier, it gives those plants a chance to get a head start and do well in the garden soil or your raised bed. It also gives us an opportunity to grow cultivars that we may not get at a local nursery. So we may get some other options if we decide to start our own seeds and some more options of where we can get those from. And one of the things I want to talk about more today is how it can help you save money as well. And that's one of the main reasons that we chose to do winter sowing in our community gardens here in Franklin County. So what is it? USDA's definition of winter sowing is that it's a propagation method that's used throughout the winter in temperate climates where seeds are sown into vented containers. The vented containers part is very important. We'll talk more about that. And then they're placed outdoors to foster that naturally timed high percentage germination. So basically what that means is it's an easy way to grow our seedlings in an environmental friendly way. And this method has been around since around 2000, so it's not super old, but has been used a lot in gardens over the last couple of decades. So why would we want to winter sow? The first is it's pretty easy and I think it's fun. This is a program that I've done in the schools here in Franklin County with our high school students. I've also worked with some of our micro school. We have Riverside Academy, which is a small micro school in Franklin County. With those students, they're grades K through 6. Anyone can really get involved in winter sowing, whether you're a youth or an adult. Another reason I really like it is that it's inexpensive and environmental friendly. So Sophie mentioned in my bio that I'm really interested in circular economy, and one of the programs that I teach about. And basically what circular economy is this system where materials never become wasted and nature is regenerated. And I think winter sowing is a great example of that. I talk about it in a lot of my different presentations as a way we can save materials and be resourceful. Another thing I really like about it is there's really no hard and fast rules. We'll talk about some examples with timing and when to start seeds in this presentation, but it really is pretty flexible and pretty forgiving, which I think works well when you're going to be working with a school garden or you may have limited time to devote to starting seeds. That makes winter sowing, I think, really attractive. You also get those strong, healthy plants, and you can start growing those plants from seed with little to no cost. You don't have to have grow lights, and once you get them planted, there's really not much care that you have to do afterwards. So I want to give you a circular economy example so we can talk a little bit more about the money saving aspect of winter sowing. So the picture on the left was my first attempt at winter sowing when I was doing a practice round. I met with Sophie before this presentation. I told her I usually like to practice all of the things I do with my extension programs on my own farm and my own garden, kind of as a trial before I get started to make sure it works before I start teaching people about it. And this was my first experiment that I did with my own jugs at my house, starting those reused containers. And the nice thing about it is that it doesn't cost very much to get started. So if we're talking about the seeds in the soil, if I wanted to start 100 seedlings, that's only going to cost me about $15 for seeds approximately and $12 for soil. So I have about $27 invested so far. And then if I add buying some labels in there that cost $5, that's going to bring me up to $32 that I'm investing because I have my reused container, so I don't have any cost in that. So a total of $32 to kind of get started with winter sowing, and I can get potentially 100 plants if they do well. Versus if I'm going to buy new equipment for seed starting and I have limited resources or I'm just getting started, it may be a little bit more difficult. So if I needed to buy seed trays that cost $30 and a little pop-up greenhouse, let's say it costs $250, that's going to bring me up to $280 that's invested. If I need to get grow lights that cost $120 on top of that, that brings me up to $400 invested. And then if I get a heating mat, that's another $30. That brings me up to $430 already. So my one-time equipment cost is going to be around $430 if I'm going to be buying new equipment to do seed starting in a greenhouse. So if we take that new equipment cost minus the cost it would take to do winter sowing, we're going to save about $430. So that's keeping the idea in mind that that's just our equipment, thinking our consumables, like our seeds, our soil, our labels, that's all the same. So one nice thing about the circular economy example with winter sowing is that it's really a way for us to save money and be resourceful in our community gardens or our school gardens or in our own personal gardens. Now you could pick this apart and say if you want to invest in a greenhouse for multiple years, this is just that first time equipment use, but it is something to consider if you're working with groups that are just getting started to save some money. So other than saving money, there are other reasons that you should do winter sowing. One of the reasons is it protects the seeds really well. So it naturally creates this little mini greenhouse effect. So if you look in this 2-liter bottle, you can see some of the condensation that's built up above those plants. And this little mini greenhouse is really protecting those seeds from those cold temperatures when they're outside. It also is a way to eliminate competition from weeds. So as long as you have a good potting soil that you're using to start your seeds that don't have any weed seeds in them, it gives your seeds a chance to germinate and grow without competing with weeds. So if you were just planting them in the garden, It's almost impossible to keep all your weeds out. So it eliminates one of those challenges for you. It also gives the seeds a chance to have that natural stratification. So this is just a technique to control germination, location, and condition. And it helps us get our plants started off in a nice, strong way. One of my personal favorite things about winter sowing is it eliminates that need for hardening off. So if you were starting seeds indoors in a greenhouse, you would have to go through this hardening off period before you transplanted your seeds in the garden. So that usually requires setting your seeds out during the day and bringing them in at night and trying to get them conditioned to be planted into the garden. When you're doing winter sowing, you really just take the lid off for a couple days, and that helps get them ready to transplant. You don't really need this hardening off. And I found that I don't lose nearly as many plants with winter sowing as if I were just starting seeds indoors. That hardening off phase is where a lot of people lose their seeds that they've started indoors. And another nice thing about it is it reduces the need for watering. So if you had seeds that you were starting indoors, you'd have to make sure you were watering those frequently. As long as your jugs are sitting in a place, or whatever container you're using for winter sowing is in a place that it can capture rainwater and get that natural rain, you can leave these seeds left, you can leave them unattended for weeks at a time, as long as they're getting some sort of water from the rain or naturally. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different things that you can winter sow, and really the options are really unlimited. You can do native plants this way, you can do perennials, you can do different herbs or annuals, and all different kinds of vegetables. The only things that you really don't want to winter sow are your different kind of root crops. So your vegetable root crops like beets or carrots, those are things you don't really want to winter sow because it's really difficult to transplant. As far as the timing, it depends on where you are in the United States, in particular within the state of Indiana, making sure you're paying attention to what your frost dates are, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But in general, these timeframes, if we're looking through the winter months of December, January, and February, this is a great time to start native plants. So we have pollinator gardens here at our community gardens in Franklin County as well. So if we wanted to plant things like butterfly weed or milkweed, collect those seeds, or coneflower seeds, we could start those throughout the winter. And it's a great way to get a jump start for them for the next year as well. You can also do other perennials that require that stratification, so just that freeze that they need in order to germinate. So things like lavender and catmint. You can also do native grasses, vines, and trees this way. Your cold weather veggies, you can start in the winter. Spinach, kale, Brussels sprouts, your herbs like thyme, oregano, and parsley, and then some hardy annuals as well are good through that December through February timeframe. Now there are plants you want to sow a little bit later in March and April, and these are more of your tender plants. So tender annuals, so things like cosmos or zinnias that may be killed by a frost, your vegetables that aren't quite as hardy, like lettuce, broccoli, and then herbs like basil. And then our even more tender plants that we may sow even later in April are things like our tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, pumpkin, and squash. And really just want to consider when you're going to be transplanting. As far as the materials for what you'll need to winter sow, it's not a very long list to get. And like I said, it's not very expensive. So you're going to need a container of some sort. So a clear plastic milk type jug works really great. I've used other types of plastic containers, like plastic salad containers or strawberry containers. They work as well. But I find that the milk jugs work the best. It gives the plants more room to grow as they get taller before you transplant. And I like them personally. You also need some tape for sealing the jug once you get your seeds planted, and for labeling, a marker for your labeling. You're going to need scissors, a sharp knife, or a drill. As I mentioned in the definition for winter sowing, it's really important you create a place where these jugs can vent. So drilling holes in the bottom. It's also important so they can drain. So when they're out there in the natural environment, they're getting that natural rainwater coming in. You want to make sure they're not getting too wet or too sogged. So making sure that those can drain. So having those holes drilled in the bottom is really important. You're going to need your seeds. And then I like to use newspaper to line the bottom of the jug. So once you have your holes drilled and you put the newspaper in the bottom, once your seeds sprout and they're growing roots, that newspaper keeps those roots from growing through the holes in the bottom of the jug that you've drilled so they can drain. And the reason that you want to have that barrier is that you don't want to be breaking your roots when it comes to times of transplant. So that newspaper can really kind of help as that barrier and keep your roots all contained. You want to make sure you water the soil thoroughly once you put it in the jug. And then the most important part of winter sowing, or I think gardening in general, is that you have patience and wait once you get things planted that they can do well. So next we're going to go over the steps. So the first thing you need to do is collect and wash a container. So you want to make sure you remove any residue. So depending on what that container was used for prior, if it was a milk jug, making sure that you're getting it nice and clean. The next step is you're going to drill those 5 to 6 drain holes in the bottom. So if you look at the top picture here on the right, you can see those holes that are drilled there. As I mentioned, it's really important for the drainage to make sure your roots don't get too waterlogged. You're going to cut your container in half, and you want to leave about 4 inches on the bottom. So if you look at this picture here on the bottom left, you can see there's about a 1 to 2 inch hinge there. You want to leave that 4 inches so you have enough room for your roots to grow down and they have enough space to get established in your jug. And then you want to make sure that you prepare that label with a marker. You can write on the duct tape from where you've sealed your jug back or on the outside of the jug. It's really important to make sure you label them. That way you know what it is. And depending on if you're starting multiple different types of seeds, some of them may need transplanted at different times. So making sure you have that date that you planted them so you can be prepared to know when you need to do your transplanting. And having it labeled in a couple places is nice. A lot of times I'll put a marker down inside the jug, also right on the outside of the jug. So I have it in a couple places because being out in the sun, they can get faded and sometimes that wording can wear off. So making sure you have it marked clearly for yourself. And when you're ready to add that potting mix, so you're going to add about 3 or 4 inches of potting mix to the bottom of that jug, you want to make sure you wet it thoroughly and really push it down and compact it into the bottom of the jug and making sure that water drains out. So you want to thoroughly wet, push down so you can compress that soil and remove any air bubbles. And that's going to help provide a good environment for your seeds to germinate and to start forming their roots. So I want to jump back a little bit more and talk a little bit more about the timing. So I mentioned earlier the importance of frost dates. So this is a table that's from our Purdue Consumer Horticulture publication that's on starting seeds indoors. Even though this is a publication about starting seeds indoors, I find it really helpful as a guide for winter sowing as well. So if you're looking at this table on the left, we have the time to seed before the last frost, so the weeks before that last frost that we need to plant that different type of plant. So we have the different type of plants listed, how many days it's going to take them to germinate, and then how quickly they grow, whether they grow really quickly or if it's more of a medium growth rate. And what I think is most important in this table for winter sowing or for our purposes today is this cold frost tolerance after hardening. So if you look at plants like tomatoes, eggplant, pepper, they don't have any cold frost tolerance after hardening. So once we get them transplanted into the garden, if we have a frost, they most likely will not make it. So how do we know when our frost may be? So these are maps of Indiana with the average date of last spring frost, so that 32 degrees Fahrenheit on the left, and then also our average date of first fall frost on the right. For the purposes of winter sowing and seed starting, we're really focused on this last spring frost, the map of Indiana on the left. And if you see the dates that are ranging there, depending on where you are in Indiana, there is a range of dates typically that have been studied to have that kind of range of that last spring frost. So I'm down in the southeast part of the state in the light green color in Franklin County. So if you look at the dates there, it's April 15th to April 22nd. So usually in that time frame is the last time we'll have a really hard frost. So I want to make sure that I'm transplanting my plants into the garden most likely after April 22nd. I like to be a little bit more conservative and cautious just because I don't want to put a lot of work into getting my plants ready and then lose them to a frost. So it depends on what your risk tolerance is on when you may be willing to transplant. But this is a good range to kind of give yourself to go by. And we all know if we're in Indiana, our weather can be crazy here. So this isn't necessarily going to be the same every year. There could be some variation in that. So making sure that you're keeping that in mind too, but giving yourself a little bit of grace or wiggle room with the end of that frost state, I think works well. So if we go back to this table and we focus in on tomatoes, we see that we want to start tomatoes about 7 weeks prior to our last frost. So I just told you in Franklin County in the southeast part of the state, that's between April 15th and the 22nd. So if I counted back 7 weeks before that, that means I wouldn't want to winter sow my tomatoes earlier than the week of March 2nd. So it's just a matter of looking at your seed packet and doing the math to see what's going to work well for you. I also have some seed packets for eggplants and peppers here in front of me. A lot of times when you buy one of these seed packets at the store, it'll say start indoors in a warm lighted area 8 to 10 weeks before the last frost. So it's just important to make sure you kind of have an idea of when that last frost will be and then count back the number of weeks. And you can kind of use that as a guide for winter sowing as well. And you should be safe that way. For this peppers, it says start indoors in a warm, well-lighted area about 8 weeks before planting outdoors. And we know we want to plant outdoors after that frost. So if you see those on the seed packets, that's how you can kind of do the math to look to see when will be safe to plant whatever it is that you're wanting to winter sow. So once you have everything prepared, you're going to plant those seeds following the packet instructions of whatever it is you have. And making sure you're giving yourself that amount of time to prevent your seeds from getting that chance of frost after transplant. You also want to make sure when you're placing your seeds, I usually make a couple holes, like 4 or 5 holes in each 1-gallon milk jug where I can put a seed or 2 in. I usually put a couple in just in case one doesn't germinate. But you want to make sure that they're planted in a way that you can easily cut them and pull them apart when it's time to transplant. So depending on what it is, if you're doing flowers, you may do them in more of a mass. Vegetables, I usually like to do more individually. So making sure you're planting them in a way that it'll be easy to pull them apart later. Then once you get those seeds planted, you're going to plant them following those packet instructions with the depth. Then you're going to seal that container up, tape it closed, and wait. So depending on the number of weeks it was for whatever you chose, you'll wait that amount of time. And where you put your container is important. You want to make sure that it's in a sunny area, a place where it can get that natural rainwater, and a place that's safe from wind and any animals, whether they're wild animals or pets that may mess with your jugs. And then after you've waited your amount of time till your plants are starting to grow, once you see a couple sets of true leaves, so if you look at these tomatoes, it's the bottom picture here on your screen. When you have a couple leaves, sets of true leaves like that, you're going to start opening your containers, and that's going to help them acclimate to be transplanted. So some tips for transplanting. So you want to wait, like I just said, until those seeds have sprouted at least 2 true leaves. You're going to open your container for about 2 to 3 days before transplanting to let them acclimate to fully being in the outside environment. You'll gently pull your plants apart. The roots are really fragile, so you want to make sure you're really careful during this process. Try to keep as much soil around the roots as you can. When you're transplanting into your raised bed or your garden, you want to dig the hole about twice as large as the soil mass around the roots, just to give that plenty of room and lighten and loosen that soil that's around your new plant. It's also important to make sure that you set the plants at the same level that they've been growing in their pots. You don't want to plant them deeper than they were growing or more shallow than they've been growing. Try to keep it at that same level, and that'll help them transplant easier. And then also making sure that you're watering them thoroughly after transplanting. It's very important. So the next thing I want to do is just give a couple examples and so some pictures of me doing this in Franklin County. So last year I went to the Franklin County High School and worked with their horticulture class. So on April 10th of last year is when we prepared the jugs. And we did mostly more tender vegetables. So we did tomatoes, eggplant. We also did some squash and cucumbers. We did this a little bit later. We could have started them a little bit sooner, but like I said, I'm usually a little bit more on the conservative end. So this is a time frame that we used. Last year, I gave them a presentation kind of similar to this one, went over the importance of winter sowing, how they were going to help our community gardens, and how they could help me create these jugs. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, I like to take some props with me and ask some questions. So I don't know if anyone can see, I have it here in real life too, that picture of that white circled almond milk jug. This one here. I like to take this with me when I'm giving this type of presentation. Can anyone tell me why we wouldn't want to use a jug like this for winter sowing? If you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. If anyone has any thoughts. And I can't see the chat, Sophie, so you'll have to let me know if anyone puts an answer in there.
I think one was it's not
Perfect.
translucent, maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so if we try to use this for winter sowing, the sunlight is not going to go through, it's not going to get to the seeds, they're not going to germinate and sprout. So it's really important that you make sure you're using a translucent or a clear jug of some sort. Otherwise, it is not going to work. And I hadn't really thought about that too much as being an issue until one of the programs I was doing, someone brought that jug to use as their own. And I was like, oh, like that won't work. So I was like, I should add that into a presentation as an important step, making sure it's a clear, clean jug. Otherwise, you're not going to be very successful. And then on May 1st of 25, so about 4 weeks later, we were ready to transplant some of our plants. So you can see we have some squash and some cucumbers that have those true leaves that are ready to transplant. So I had opened the lid up on these a few days prior to students from Riverside Academy coming to help me transplant them. As you can see, though, a lot of those jugs, the lids are still closed. So our okra, our tomato, our peppers, they weren't quite ready yet. We needed to give them a couple more weeks just because of when we started them. So knowing too, if you decide to start a bunch of different vegetables at the same time, it's going to be different times for transplanting depending on what it is. And that's when going back to that chart and learning the number of weeks that you need for that seed to be ready to transplant is important for your garden planting. And as I mentioned, it's really important to make sure you're really careful with pulling the seeds, your plants out of the jug. So I kind of help the students with that just so to make sure they didn't accidentally pull them out and rip off the roots. So making sure if you're working with students that they know how to pull a nice amount of soil with that plant so you can get it transplanted properly, and then making sure that you're watering them after. This group of kids range from kindergarten to 6th grade, and they had a lot of fun with it. And then I just want to show a little bit of the progress pictures too. So on June 5th last year, we had our squash was flowering, and then by July 8th, we had our produce ready to harvest. And this produce we donate to local food pantries. So depending on your school garden or the garden you're working with, and when you want to harvest the produce or who you want to get the produce to or who you want to have involved kind of plays into that timing as well. And that's the main things of the winter sowing. So I was just going to summarize with kind of 10 simple steps to break it down. One of the things I like to take when I'm doing this presentation too is laminated sheets of this winter sowing picture that's here on the right side of the screen to keep for people to kind of see as they're preparing their jugs. But just to summarize, you just want to make sure you collect clear, clean jugs and you wash those containers. Really important to cut your drain holes in the bottom. Make sure you don't forget that step when you're prepping your containers. You're going to prepare your labels, add your potting mix and water it thoroughly, compressing that soil down before you plant your seeds. Then you seal your container and you wait. Putting your jug in a safe spot where it can get that sun and that rainwater. And that's really the main care for the jugs. It's just making sure they're not messed with and they're in a safe space. And then when you're getting into those warmer spring days or summer days and you're ready to transplant, making sure you're opening these up and getting those plants ready a couple days before the transplant date, and then you transplant your seedlings and continue to wait more for the plants to actually grow and to produce the produce. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has about the process or go back to any of the slides, but just want to thank you for having me and hope you learned some things about winter sowing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Veronica. Yeah, we can open it up here. Oh, that's great to see those resources and also your email. So people feel free to reach out if you have questions, I'm sure. Yeah, and just kind of to offer some more context, we felt like this could really be a helpful method for anyone at a school, a teacher, a food service professional, an administrator, a daycare employee. There's so many of you all that are really busy and you have a lot on your plates. And you also might be helping or supporting a school garden or school growing activity. So we felt like this could be a really, like Veronica said, an inexpensive way to start some seeds earlier on in the season. Instead of having to spend money on buying plant starts or something later on. So that's kind of what brought us here. And yeah, I learned a ton. So thanks for sharing all of it.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Then I'll stop sharing unless anyone has a
Okay.
slide they want me to go back to so I can see everyone too. Or unless you just want to tell me what's in the chat, that's fine as well.
I
If
do have
anyone
a
has
quick,
Yeah.
oh, go
question.
ahead.
Sorry. My
Okay.
name is Alyssa Davila. I am the Family and Community Engagement Specialist for the Gary Community School Corporation. And we are excited to be starting our district-wide school garden initiative this coming spring. And when I saw this training, I thought it was a perfect fit. And I guess my question would be, is it still, are we too late to start winter sowing now to prepare our flower beds for this year?
I would say no. Depending on
Okay.
if you're wanting to do vegetables, you can definitely still start those this year. So the main thing is just making sure you have the containers saved. So if you start doing that now, the first time that I did this in Franklin County as a program, I had a local business donate all of their like spring water jugs that they used in their office. So if you can find an organization that may have containers that they've saved already, that's a great way to get a lot of jugs. It's worked well for me. But as long as you can start saving those reused containers, and then if I go back to the example of tomatoes, let me see if this will let me go back. Really, the thing that you want to think about is these last spring frost dates. So if you're up in Gary in the northern part of the state, you're probably not wanting to transplant until at least April 22nd or April 28th anyway. So if you're going to be starting things like tomatoes or peppers, eggplants, you wouldn't start that until at least probably the second week of March anyway, to give yourself time. So you have at least a month to prepare as far as getting your
Okay,
seeds
got
and
it.
saving your jugs. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Are these pictures that you have here like available for download for schools to be able to utilize or kind of refer to? Is there a good link that, and maybe it's already shared out, that we
Yes,
would
so
be able to
these,
send?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're good. I was just saying that we could maybe put on like our school gardens page or something to link to connect people to this type of information as they're thinking about this type of activity.
Yes, so the table that I showed and both of these maps are in our seed starting publication. So it's a free
Okay.
downloadable PDF from our Purdue Extension store. I also sent it to Sophie too,
Awesome.
and it's linked in my resources as well. So both of those are in there, and it has more in-depth information about starting seeds than what I went over today. But I kind of pulled out some of the highlights from there. But
Awesome.
yeah, they're in our publications.
Thank you. I know
You're
sometimes we
welcome.
go off like seed packets and then we're like, well, do they know where we like then we have to figure out that frost date, right? And so I think this can be really helpful to not just think of our frost date as like central Indiana, but to look by really by our counties here.
Yeah, and this map was put together by the Indiana State Climate Office. And there's also a link to their website with this photo as well. But the nice thing about this map is it's updated for every region within Indiana, and it goes off accurate data. And they update it whenever it needs updated.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing such awesome information. This is great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was curious, you mentioned the term true leaves, and I'm making an assumption on what that is, but is that like opposed to the sun leaves that first pop out of a little seedling?
Yeah, let me go back. I had a picture. Oh, let me go the other way. So if we're looking at the tomato plant, that's at the bottom, I would consider those like the true leaves, and that if you're looking at the picture on the top of the screen, when they're just sprouting, like I would not consider those like the true leaves. So when they're just sprouting, so if you're looking at like a soybean or a bean plant, you kind of get that little almost like a thumb of a leaf that's not your real true leaf once you're
Mm-hmm.
setting in. So you want to wait till they get kind of those leaves that they're going to have, or what the leaves is going to look like as they grow. So not when they're just sprouting, it's hard to identify them. So if I looked at that top picture, I wouldn't necessarily know exactly what plant it was. But if I'm looking at the tomato at the bottom, I can see and identify those leaves. I want to go back to the ones too from where we transplanted. So like the squash and the zucchini. I don't know if I can annotate. Can you see my laser pointer? Okay.
Yeah.
So these are like the squash and the zucchini. So I would consider like this like a nice true leaf, and this one. If I look down here at my cucumbers, which are a little bit smaller, like if it was just these two, I wouldn't want to transplant it yet. I want to wait till I kind of get this bigger one on. So just waiting until it's not just that like fresh seedling. So all the ones I have opened have what I would consider like the true leaves. The ones that are closed, they don't have those yet. So once you start seeing them really starting to develop. And like I said, I like to be on the more cautious side of the transplanting and even opening. I like to let the plants just get a little bit stronger. And maybe I wait a little bit too long by some other standards, but I've had pretty good success with waiting until they get a little bit bigger. It's just when you open them too soon, those plants are really tender still, and there's a chance that they may not make it, especially if you get any cold weather.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's helpful, I think, to like know how to differentiate because that was something, I don't know, just uh you have to know those things because those first ones that pop out
Yeah,
aren't. That makes a lot of sense.
right.
The
When you're
other thing,
putting the
oh, go ahead.
seeds in, sorry,
You're good.
and you're like reading the seed packet with maybe students, and you like read the spacing, is that still pertain to these? I know it's like there was some of the containers that maybe had seeds pretty close together or sprouts. Do you thin them out? Do you space them to start with, or how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it well. Can't really see it well in that picture, so I'll stay with this one. So like for example, if I'm look at this pepper packet that I have here, um, you want to plant them a quarter-inch deep, and then the spacing really comes into when you're putting them into the garden. So the winter sowing spacing isn't as important, other than the fact that you want to be able to make sure that, like, I want to be able to make sure I can pull these 4 cucumber plants apart without potentially hurting the other one. So if you have too many, so sometimes when I'm planting them, I would make like 5 holes, so like 1, 2, 3, 4 on the edges, and then one in the center to start seeds. If I was doing tomatoes, and I would usually put 2 to 3 seeds in each hole. Sometimes all 3 of those tomato plants will come up, and in that sense, you can either like carefully try to pull out the weakest plants, or you can like snip them off with scissors. That way, you can give that strongest plant like a chance to really take hold and grow. You'll always probably get more seeds germinate than what you need, especially and a lot of times you won't use all the seeds in the seed packet unless you want an abundance of whatever it is. So whether you can share with another school, another garden, if you can swap plants or do things that way as well, I think works well. And I've done that with our community gardens too. If we start, last year we had an abundance of squash and zucchini and did really well, but being able to swap with others that may have had abundance of something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, you definitely probably won't use all of the seeds that germinate. So, and that's okay. Making sure that you give the strongest one a chance to do well.
I think you mentioned this, but did you say when you're looking on a seed packet and it says like 10 weeks before the last frost date or potential last frost date, can you kind of interchange that with when you might start seeds outside, like in a seed sowing method?
Yes, yep,
Okay,
that's the way that I do it. I think it works well that way. So even though it says start indoors on the seed packet, this method is similar to the fact in the sense that this is a mini greenhouse, right? So if we were
right, yeah.
growing them like on a greenhouse inside, it's a similar concept for the seed starting. So I think it as that general rule of thumb. And the nice thing I think I mentioned at the beginning about winter sowing is that it's not really as hard and fast with the rules as it is as starting seeds indoors or in a greenhouse. It's a lot more forgiving. So you have a little bit of flexibility, but I like to use like whether it's 8 to 10 weeks or whatever that range is on the seed packet as my starting to count back from that frost date, so I know when to get things going
Yeah.
for my jugs. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that's great to hear that it's a little more forgiving and flexible because I think that definitely is what draws me to it and also feels like it could be helpful for folks working in school settings and early childcare settings because starting your own seeds can be really hard when you're having to harden them off, like you said, and move them outside and so on
Yes.
and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, making sure they're watered regularly or not getting
Yeah.
too dry, like all of the things that go with it. As far as these jugs, you can probably see like a little bit of like the condensation that's built up on most of these. Usually most springs in Indiana, we get enough rain that you don't need to add any additional water. But if I ever noticed that like I didn't have much condensation on my jug, sometimes I would add a little bit of water in there. That's the other thing it's too, it's really important with making sure you really thoroughly wet the soil when you're getting started. Um, I have a couple of the jugs here that I brought. I don't know if you can see if I hold it up. So if I'm planning cutting this is about 4 inches. I'm going to fill it with soil and like really press it down and condense it. And you want to wait till there's really water running out before you ever put the seeds in. And that's going to help you later on once you get them outside, like maintaining that moisture and things in the jug. If it's not wetted thoroughly to start, then you're going to have more issues with like holding moisture and things. But as long as it's really wet to start, then you should be in a pretty good place. I ran into that a little bit with some of the high school students when they started. We were also in the classroom here, right? So when you thoroughly wet the soil, it creates a really big mess. So making sure that you have like paper towels or things to clean up around because you want to make sure that that water is really running through. So some of these were a little bit dry, so I had to add water later once we got them to the community garden. But making sure that you're prepared if you're doing this in the classroom to have things to clean up that water or doing it outdoors, I think is if it's warm enough, if you have a really nice day in March or April and you can do it outside, that's the ideal. I think it's less mess to clean up.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? Alrighty. Well, if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen. I just had a few slides here to kind of finish us up. So I'll go ahead and do that. So, kind of action items. We talked about this a little bit, but yeah, start if you want to do this, start saving your milk jugs now. And you can also one thing that I have done is like I saved a few and then I started some, and then you can save some more and start some more. So, like Veronica said, make sure to put the dates on there so you kind of know when you're starting things. The other thing we wanted to flag is that Veronica has offered to do some kind of like point in time or like real time, I guess I should say, videos this coming spring. So we're not exactly sure on the dates yet, but we're thinking maybe in March to April we'll do for a video, and she can kind of walk you through exactly how you're going to do this. And then at the end, she's going to show you how to open those jugs, like she mentioned. And then in mid-May, we'll show how to transplant. So be on the lookout for those videos. We'll have them recorded, and you'll be able to see them. So yeah, we can all kind of learn together. And we'll be using tomato seeds because for our Food Day initiative, which I have the QR code here for registration, but if you would like to participate in Food Day this year, you can sign up here and get seeds, and then you will be able to utilize those when you're doing your winter sowing. So you can, of course, sow any seeds that you would like, but we're just kind of tying it in with our Food Day celebration here. So with that, we'll open up to any other questions or share outs that people want to have. If you have other, school garden excitements, that's really exciting to hear about the Gary community that will be starting the gardens in that district. We might reach out to you just to make sure you have the support that you need. So yeah, any other share outs that people want to do or questions, we'll open it up here. Yeah, of course. Also, we'll reach out for sure. If we don't have any questions, oh, thanks, Brianna, for putting that in the chat. Sometimes we just kind of end these office hours early if people feel like they have the information they need. So, once again, thank you so much, Veronica, for jumping on here and doing such great information sharing. We're excited to kind of have you as a resource as we delve into this new technique for our network across the state.
Thank you for having me again, Sam. I'm happy to help, and I really enjoyed doing this program with students in Franklin County and with our community members, and I think it's a great way to get your seeds started. So I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Alrighty. With that, we'll end the meeting. Have a great day, everyone.